live today in a world that is very special. The owl of Minerva, which delivers valid scientific knowledge in the medium of philosophy, usually starts its flight at dusk. And you have to know, Michael wrote his second dissertation on Hegel's philosophy. You know the owl of Minerva. So this flight starts at dusk. Tranquility and clarity, yes, silence beyond the hustle and bustle of the everyday world characterizes the situation in which the owl circles its object. Quite a few sciences have thought and seek to follow the epistemic constellation of Hegel's flight of the owl. The contours of the phenomenon are seen with great clarity in this twilight. At least this is the idea. The fact is that this image and the inner logic of scientific knowledge formation that it contains, this epistemic dispositive belongs to a bygone age. It's over, if it ever existed at all. Waiting until the phenomena can be observed in the twilight is no longer possible today, at least when it comes to the media of the media society. The change in media technology is happening faster than some third-party funded research project with their application procedures and so on. Even since this project was conceived, which brings us together today, artificial intelligence has further transformed the media system more than we think of. The forms no longer can be observed when they are old and gray. No, they had to be observed and they are replaced by new ones in the middle of the day and have to be observed and analyzed in the hustle and bustle of the day. If science is an owl, then it must today describe a fast-flying flock of birds. And the question is, which flies faster? And yet there is another problem in our field. Every exploration of the media, and even more so their scientific observations, struggles with a problem that theology has been dealing since its conception. There is no vantage point outside the observed thing from which the owl can circle its subject in flight. We do recording. You have handies. I saw someone doing some messages while listening. The media system has become so ubiquitous that it can only be analyzed and observed in the midst of itself. In doing so, science acts as if it could observe the media system from the outside. This is an operative fiction comparable to the theological attempt to view the world from God's perspective. But in all our analysis of the media system, we remain trapped in the media society. That is what characterizes the media society. There is no escape and no position outside. We are in the middle of it, in the middle of the tumult of practices of new developments, in the middle of the fight for attention for scientific results. But without the operative fiction that we have at least 1 foot outside, we cannot work scientifically. How could you work on a dissertation if you would constantly think about the publication and the resonance it might cause? So let's be honest, we are right in the middle of it, whether we are technology optimists, early adopters, or technology pessimists. Some folks who always adopt with a delay of 5 to 6 to 10 years. These are the late adopters. There is no outside, sooner or later. And yet there must be an outside. That is our situation. For those who don't know it, I'm quoting Karl Barth. And then there is a third dimension, present in our research book. The media system is characterized by an inner complexity and inner differentiation, by such a simultaneity of the non-simultaneous. Yes, there are still people writing on paper with ink. By such a variety of functions for other systems, that it is extremely difficult to speak of the values in the media system in our advanced modern age. This intangibility or hypercomplexity is reflected not least in the unconvincing diversity or unsurmountable diversity of scientific approaches to the media system. Here, journalism. There, film studies. Here, modern literary studies. There, media psychology. Here, media sociology. There, cultural studies in the medias. And then there are some folks who observe it from the side of theology. They all struggle to gain access to aspects of the media system. Meanwhile, the media system is proliferating, or mushrooming, you might say, along with technological developments, economic expansion, and political exploitation. And now, a fourth consideration. The old social subsystems, at least law, religion, and medicine, have tried to develop institutions of permanent normative self-descriptions. In my opinion, one of the difficulties with the media is that their intrinsic complexity and many other factors, their inner normativity, is nowhere systematically reflected inside of the system. So it's a huge advantage that we have theological faculties. They are much more institutionalized critique of religion than any department of media studies in terms of normativity for the media. So this lack of an institutionalized form of normative self-description makes it so difficult to nail the pudding to the wall. If one wanted to describe the media system in terms of its value preferences, this description would turn out to be impossible, like a classic portrait from the 18th and 19th century. So my suggestion is, and we see it in the book, and I think we see it in several books, what we describe as a value problem, we cannot portray like an 18th and 19th century portrait. At best, it's a portrait that is fragmented into more perspectives like that of Picasso or Braque in their Cubist phase. Fragmentary, multi-perspective, viewed from the front, from the behind, from inside, from outside, ultimately a fragmentary collage. But this is not a problem. This is the situation. There's no other way to do it. The question of values in the media system also highlights in a more dramatic way what is a difficult theoretical problem for the entire research project discussed here. And it came out almost in every second contribution in the media book. On the one hand, it is necessary to analyze the inherent rationalities and the specific dynamics of the respective cultural spheres or subsystems of society. Media, law, economy. Ultimately, however, these things are in processes of covariance. On the one hand, the inherent dynamics with their specific value preferences are reinforced during the last decades, surely. At the same time, however, the degree of interconnectedness with other subsystems increases. Both increases, the autonomy and the interrelatedness. So, Niklas Luhmann would speak of the performance of service relationships between the systems, and if you go to Hegel again, it's sometimes very unclear who is master and who is slave in this relationship. So it is increasingly difficult to determine where the system boundaries run in these reciprocal claims. Where is the boundary between the media system and the economic system? A question raised several times in the book. Where is the boundary between the media system and politics? And we can expand this further with where is the boundary between media and the art, a question we did not raise in the project, or media and sport. So the contributions of the volume deal with the internal complexity and at the same time with the difficulty of drawing boundaries. They are fragmentary and exemplary, ultimately they form something like a cubist painting. But I have to start now the description, which I will not do, with an observation. In the media book, there is a lot of media critique. And it's a high qualified critique. It is not media bashing, but it's predominantly a media critique which is not really taking into account how we admire and live by media. So it is sophisticated academic lament, but we stay in contact with our friends through media of communication. WhatsApp, your Christmas cards. Media is building, as the sociologian Benedict Anderson reminded us years ago, imagine communities. Imagine communities of churches. Imagine communities of friendship. Imagine communities of extended families, of the city, the nation, the European Union, and worldwide solidarity is built through the media. So not only politics, but also healthcare and others need the media for education. Think about sports. How much pleasure would we have, or how little pleasure would we have, if we would not extend the crowd present at the stadium? And today we have to say, oh, how much CO2 do we save by not traveling to the stadium? How much emotions in life is steered by means of media simulating presence? And when you enjoy Christmas cards during the next weeks, you will not only Christmas carols, to be specific, you will not only sing it by yourself and go to concerts, but you listen to media. And when did you talk to a politician in person the last time? Politics, for good and evil, depends on information, on communication, done by media. And we could go on and go on. But the point is, because we're in the middle of it, we can not clearly often distinguish where we benefit and where we destroy, where we build and where we destroy. That's part of the gray area we live in. And I skip over, we can have a conversation tomorrow. Let me skip over the idea how media and religion are so closely related and that they are in an entangled relationship of entanglement. And we had it in the stories, we had it in the book when many contributions talked about the stories told. I want to shift now to problems raised, and these problems go across the various contributions. And the key problems we saw in the book, and you see in the book. And I think we have an excellent summary introduction to the various individual contributions by von Hagen and Michael Welger, no problem. So, a couple of problems that run through the book. What do we do when we talk about values in the media system and the various subparts? Where do the values come? And interestingly enough, we see in a positive way, but very much in a negative way, a kind of swap, a transition. So if male chauvinism and cyber-misogyny appear in the media, they do come, not from the media, they do come from common sense and the broader culture. So we have value traffic between the systems. And we have value traffic inside into the media system. And if we see some deformation, a problem in the media, one question is it media system generated or is it coming from somewhere else? That's very important for the analysis. Second, we have in the media formation mechanisms. It's a major institution for stories in our world. Every politician, every scientist, every religious leader, bishop, has to live in an extremely story-shaped world, but the story shaping is primarily taking place through media narrative. And so mimetic practices do replace a lot of discourse. You just listen and you have a mimetic formation of emotion. You just watch, and you have a mimetic formation in your imagination. So the formation in inner spaces is becoming so crucial because the formation of inner spaces is tied to watching it performed. So the whole moral formation is reshaped. And people become observers and people being attached to performance of certain moral value. What would be an example? Well, I cannot answer the question, but I think the question is interesting. What would happen to our legal system if all our crime stories and cop movies would end with a triumph of the evildoer? Would this kick away the audience? Would this ruin our morality on the long run? It would definitely shape the inner space of imagination. In the same way as we certainly benefit, and Michael Welger pointed out in many lectures, well, the fairness we train in sport is actually also moral formation. Sport has a very important form. So the formation of spaces, inner spaces of moral imagination, is a crucial issue. And we don't want to miss it. The question is, how can we form it? Another issue running through is, where do we really live? How do we navigate in a world where we participate in other life through media and where we live our bodily life? Where do we really live? If you easily say, here in physical presence, well, you are probably not average in media consumption. Where does real life take place? We live in clustered worlds of real, fictional, and mediated fragments. And then the issue is, how much coherence would we like to have? In theology, in philosophy, we opt for coherence, lots of coherence. And I think people have to have some coherence in order to navigate their life. My wife is a psychiatrist, and she can tell about something when people lose any sense of coherence. So we should not say, oh, doesn't matter. But the coherence we dream of in most of theology and philosophy, people don't live. Where does real life take place? And what does this mean for our political, our religious projects? The fourth issue, and the landing gear is coming out, framing and media. Well, the media space is a battleground. And if we complain that an issue is inadequately framed, if we complain there is misinformation, and that's a running thread in the book. If we complain that there is misinformation, that's an observer term. We observe. You cannot observe your own misinformation. It's an observer term. And so one community of interpretation is formed by media and their frames, and other communities observe them. And my question then is, are there, and it's in several contributions, are there something like anchor experiences? Are there experiences in human life that are anchor experiences that help you to assess what is really real? And what could be these anchor experiences? If we go to anthropology, people would say, researchers would say, like Clifford Geertz, well, religion in the past provided a notion of real. And then the question is, who is real? Peter Berger, famous American sociologian of religion, talked about the sacred canopy that is possibly replaced by the media canopy. Go to Alfred North Whitehead. Who is providing the anchor experience, the connection between your solitude and the cosmos? Whitehead's definition of religion. It's the media today. Then, last, where do values reside? Where do the values in the media reside? And I think that's very important because, and believe me, I do read a lot of media ethics. If we go to the media system and ask the value issue, we have 3 options. You can decide, I want to be naive. And the most outraged literature about the media is incredibly naive. But then you can go for the second option. You can drown yourself in complexity. And by almost all fields we worked. And the research project tried to find a very fascinating middle ground. You could drown everyone in complexity and say, oh, you have to see it more differentiated. But if you are drowned in complexity, you can be, at the end, very fatalistic. And that's what we see in a lot of professional ethics, media ethics. At the end, people are hand-waving and say, oh, it's so complicated, we cannot do anything. It doesn't make a big difference to work on media ethics. So the complexity is necessary, but we need something what Paul Ricoeur called a second naivete, or we might call it third naivete. There is incredible complexity, yes. And there is the temptation of fatalism. And I think that is actually a temptation that is hovering above the whole project. And it's telling something, that theologians, people deeply rooted in the religious tradition, did not follow the naivete or the complexity leading in fatalism, but a complexity that is leading into real reflection and possible action. And in this sense, where do values reside? Yes, there are people who can make a difference. So the temptation, and I have to admit I'm coming from system thinking, the temptation of system thinking is that at the end you say, oh, you cannot make a difference. But I think it's a deeply religiously grounded encouragement that people can make a difference. Thank you very much.